Hi, my name is Kobilate. I am a sophomore. I am a legal studies major, international politics minor. Um, Hopefully, we'll declare the African Diaspora Studies minor soon. I am the international student senator to the SGA. I am also the PR chair and incoming vice president of the African Students Association.
Kaza Jawad. I'm an applied economics major. I'm minoring in math, and I'm a sophomore right now, becoming a junior. So I'm going to be graduating May 2015.
I'm Rachel. I am math and international politics double major. I don't have any minor.
And I'm from Uganda. I'm a business administration major and a French minor. Yeah, that's it.
What does it mean to be African?
African?
So what does it mean to be African? What does it mean to you to be African?
Okay.
I think being an African is celebrating your ancestors.
I think it includes all the people from African continent or African diaspora. I think it includes all the people from African continent and all the people who are African diaspora.
So, to be African to me means coming born and raised in Africa or on the continent, in any country in the continent, or being born of African parents, of African origin.
Celebrating your ancestors. Celebrating the battles that have been won, the ones that have been lost, and understanding that the African continent is a place in which hope can be drawn from.
There are people from the continent of Africa, but they have moved to certain parts of the world and they might not be living in Africa anymore. But if you choose to hold on to your roots, or if you identify yourself and you want to keep your connection with your continent, you can refer to yourself as an African.
Do you think our education system in the U.S. Has or did the best and told us two sides of history? If you're not familiar with the U.S. system, then do you think your education system at home in Uganda did a good job in telling you two sides of the story in terms of British colonization?
Definitely. Because from what I've heard, my friends who went to school here and they're African, they do not know anything. If they know something, it's a biased story about African history, and even the African history they know is very little. Like, it's kind of like it's ignored in high school and middle school.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S., yes. Because when I was back home in Uganda, that is all we learned about. And I'm sure we learned about both sides of a story, both the African side of a story, and they taught us a lot of history. Because personally, I did East African history, all the East African countries, and I did West African history. Mali, Nigeria, Ghana, I know all those kingdoms from the past. So I feel like, talking to my friends who are born here in the States and raised here, they don't know a thing. And what they know is very biased, and I want to...
Technically, you know.
I guess I'm not really sure because I don't have much background, so I can't distinguish which is hidden history or which is the actual history. So my education system just told me, I believe it's only one story of, I grew up in Korea, so there was not much of Africa, but when I came to US high school, I think it was like European Western history of Western cover of African history. So I have not much information. I don't have that much information. I guess it's one side story.
Not human, but hominin skulls and skulls of our believed ancestors to be like they were being found And whenever it was found in Asia or Europe, they were giving us specific names that this was found in Spain, this was found in maybe Asia, maybe like this was found in Iran, this was found in Israel, this was found in Indonesia. But when Africa came, they never stated a country. They always said this was found in Southern Africa, this was found in Eastern Africa. When I looked it up on my own time, I saw it was Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, South Africa, Chad. But we were like, it was in our course. It was in those presentations. But when the teacher was presenting it to us, she didn't like highlight. She didn't like. She just went over.
One of my friends I was talking to told me that when the teacher would bring up when they're learning history in class, African history, they only did it for like one class, and the teacher didn't even explain like much on the subject. Like she kind of just like ignored it, like it didn't exist. Yet back home in Uganda, it's actually a very important focal point in like what we learn. Like we learn a lot of history, African history.
I went to private school in Ghana. Then I came here. I went to public school in the United States for a while. Then I went to private school in the United States for a while. And I think all three, education systems have been framed or have been, in many ways, informed by a European. It was very much Eurocentric, and I think that kind of shows you the power of Eurocentrism. It shows you the power of a dominant history. In Ghana, I think the most non-normative experience was in Ghana when I got, private school, and we kind of got to know about African history a bit here and there. And I think it's part of the story of Kwame Nkrumah tried to reshape the kinds of histories that children were learning and how that impacted how they saw themselves. But I don't think that the education systems that I was a part of in any way told the full story. It was very much informed by a European story.
Like, I know exactly what came before me. Like I know exactly what happened before I was born. Like how they fought for colonialism and all that. Not even just colonialism, but like that history has shaped me in the sense that now that I'm in this community, now that I'm in the United States, I cannot forget where I came from. Yeah, because I know exactly what happened, and I feel like no one can just come up to me and try to brainwash me, because I know exactly what went down. I know exactly what I learned in history. So I feel like it's shaping me as an African because I feel proud of where I come from, knowing what happened, back then in history. So it just makes me a proud African, and it shapes my life in a way.
So do you think that these types of history can be implemented in the U.S. education system, or do you think that, what is your opinion on that? What do you...
I feel like if they're learning about European history, then they should also be able to learn about African history. I feel like it should be incorporated at an early age, just to educate people about, and just to remove, it also helps remove the stereotypes about Africans, because most of the people here, for example whites, they have all these African stereotypes because they do not know history about Africa. They don't know, there's no context to what they're saying. They don't know what they're talking about because they didn't learn it in high school. They didn't learn about it. So I feel like if they learn it in high school and they learn about African history, which is actually very, very rich history, there's so many things to learn about African history. I feel like if they learned it in high school, if they told them that African history, then they'd be more educated, They'd have a more educated opinion on life, on different things. They wouldn't just make all these stereotypes and think Africa is a country, all these things, asking me if I speak African and things like that. They would ask that if they learn about African history. Because then they would learn about different languages, Yes, I feel like it should be incorporated in the American education system, because if they're learning about Europe, what can they learn about Africa?
So how do you see Africa?
Africa. I think that it's a gold mine. It definitely is a continent.
Africa as a continent is not a monolith, that we are diverse, but also we have similarities that bind us together.
How much do you think you know about the continent? Do you know a lot? Do you know little?
Oh my god, I feel like I know a lot because first of all, I was born in Africa, in Uganda to be specific, and I've lived there for the past 18 years. 18. So I feel like I know a lot. I mean, because I was born there, I know the geography. You know, in school, for example, we taught about the geography of Africa, history of Africa, different parts of the continent. I learned history of most of the countries, not most, but some of the African countries. And from what I've seen on TV growing up, I've seen news on different African countries. I mean, they're not the same, but I feel like I know more because I was born and raised there.
So how much and what do you know about Africa?
I don't know much. I don't know much. I guess I hear from my friends who are from the region, or who have grown up, or who learned African history here. Yeah, I don't have it. I don't have much.
How much and what do you know about Africa?
I don't know about Africa. And I'll say this as an African. And I'll say this because I don't think anybody will ever know much about Africa. Let me rephrase it. I don't think anybody can sit as an authority on Africa. I don't think that it is right for us to say, I know a lot about Africa, because it's such a diverse continent. It has so much history. It's so complex. It's so expansive. So I know a good amount about the continent.
Mm-hmm.
I know a good amount about the communities which I've lived in on the continent, the cultures of which I'm a part. But I won't say I know a lot about the continent. All I know is that, we have a complex history. We have complex sets of cultures. Even within those cultures, there are a lot of complexities. And I do know that Africa can be the center of revolutionary thought, the center of humanity in all
What are your thoughts and opinions about how the media portrays Africa?
I guess it always portrays very sad. I guess it's extreme. Sometimes it always portrays really sad, but at the same time, very just happy, without no worries. So I don't think I'm getting too much of real African history and life, but I think that's just extreme two sides of African portrayal.
What are some stereotypes that surround Africa? Or some stereotypes that surround or portray Africa?
1. People think Africans are just poor. They think when they hear of Africa, they think about slums, they think about floods, they think about wars. They don't know that countries in Africa have flourishing economies. They don't know about the good infrastructure that we have back in Africa. They don't know that we have hospitals, we have good schools, we have good healthcare. All they think about is just poverty, poverty, poverty. They don't know that we have minerals. People here, they don't even know we have resources. They don't even have resources that are developed in the country. They have no idea about the infrastructure. We have 5-star hotels. They don't know that. And I think about what people think about Africa. When you say Africa, you say you're from Africa, immediately they're asking you, do you have land in your backyard? So all you think about is this jungle, with poor people who are not developed, they have problems. They kind of look at Africa as a problematic continent, and they feel like they have the need to come and save African people, kind of like that savior mentality. They do not know that actually the countries in Africa which are developing, actually all the countries in Africa are developing. We have infrastructure, we have hospitals just like America, we have schools just like America. The fact that I came here, I have no schools back in Uganda. It's actually very, very good universities, but it was my personal choice that I came here, to Ithaca College. So I feel like those stereotypes, they just look at it as, poverty, and yeah, just poverty. We have problems and we need help from the outside the continent.
What are some stereotypes that portray Africa?
There are many stereotypes
Or the stereotypes that surround Africa?
yeah, there are many stereotypes that surround Africa. I think, you know, most of us know about, that all of Africa is one, like it's a monolith, it's just one kind of way, there's all these horrible wars going on, there are animals running around, everybody is poor, people have no education, no hope, no aspirations. Just the idea that Africa is just this just lost cause, dry continent. So mostly in the West, that's how Africa's portrayed.
Without even like deciding, you choose to think that, oh, Africa, starving children. Oh, Africa, drought. Africa, this, Africa, that. Not developed, tribes, But I feel like media is to be blamed for that. But if you ask me as an economics major, when I'm asked what I think about Africa, I think a gold mine. Not because they have gold and other stuff, which obviously developed countries are taking from them.
What are some stereotypes that surround Africa?
I don't know. I guess it's. I guess it's portrayed as one culture. People say just, oh, I'm going to Africa, and then not specifying any country when they're even traveling, or they think all the people from Africa continent, the big continent, and a lot of people of diverse cultures are being said as one big group.
Stereotypes that you have seen that surround African Americans living in the U.S. And do some of those stereotypes from Africa and correlates with the stereotypes about African Americans here in the United States?
Oh, okay. For one thing that I've seen about in the time that I've been here, since August of last year, I've been to New York City, I've been to California, I've been to, Washington DC. So I feel like I've seen, I've seen African Americans in all those places. And one thing that even my family here in the United States, like I have relatives here, and one thing that I've seen about the stereotype about the African Americans, some of them, is that they are, how can I say, like thugs. They take drugs, they have ghetto behavior, they smoke weed.
And what would you define as ghetto behavior?
Ghetto behavior would be like smoking weed, taking drugs all the time, you're always high, pickpocketing and stealing people's things, always in the streets just lounging around like you have nothing to do. That kind of ghetto behavior, like you have nothing to do, you just idle and disorderly. Yeah, I feel like that's the stereotype. Just mainly drugs, weed, drugs and weed.
Do you see some of these things seeping back into the country? Do you see some of these behaviors going back into the country?
The country? Africa?
The continent, sorry. You see some of these?
Yeah, I feel like because of the media in Africa, I'll speak for Uganda because that's where I'm from. Some of the young people in the country, like these young people, they watch TV, then they see these musicians, that they look up to. Jay-Z, Rihanna, they're always on TV, for smoking weed and taking alcohol. And not all of them, but some of them, of course, will try to copy what their celebrities are doing, And that's that kind of thing. So, of course, you find people in Uganda who are smoking weed on the streets. Why? Because they're seeing celebrities here in America doing it. Maybe they think it's cool. So I feel like, not everyone will do it, but some people will definitely watch the media. And see what American celebrities are doing, and they'll try to do it. And I'm sure it's not just in Uganda, it's in many African countries too.
In the continent, how is the continent portrayed well on the continent?
That's a very good question. especially since I don't spend most of my time in the continent. But I think, the continent is just portrayed as just everyday people going about their business.
I mean, do we see those Western stereotypes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that Africans see themselves in that light, but I think most often we Africans are exposed to the Western stereotypes about themselves. And so they're aware of that Western lens, that Western notion of who they are or what they represent. So I don't think that folks in the continent believe themselves to be what the West portrays them as. I think often when you're
What would you say are some of the stereotypes that surround African Americans?
I think, especially, in the United States in particular, from the dominant culture, African Americans are portrayed as people who are lazy, who, again, have no sense of hope, are a lost cause, have no jobs, are all on welfare, indulge in gang activities. I won't even say indulge. Participate in gang activities, or all rappers, or just entertainers. I think that's the general stereotype of African Americans. But also not just in America. I think folks outside of America see these stereotypes on their TVs, on the internet. And so that's the stereotype of African Americans.
What are some stereotypes that surround African Americans that you have maybe heard of since you've been schooling here?
Yeah.
What are some?
I mean, I think it's a lot of them. I guess it's, again, start from having one characteristic, one culture, just like, hey, you're African, you're from Africa, just one culture and one group, one characteristic of people, different group of people. But at the same time, African Americans always have this tag of stereotypes, which is lazy, loud, not hardworking.
Yeah. Racism. Being an African, do you think Africans, those from the continent, and African Americans view racism differently? Do you think experiences are different? Do you think? Because being from the continent, everybody is your same skin color. So are you used to the fact? Are you used to racism? Are you used to the idea of racism? What is your opinion on the different ways it can be viewed from Africans and then those from the continent? Is there a similar experience or
No,
different?
it's a totally different experience because first of all, I feel like being African from the continent is different from being African American because we all have different experiences. The fact that I was born in Africa, I feel like I've encountered a totally different experience all my life than an African who was born here in the States and has been raised here. So even going on the racism thing, I feel like we Africans from the continent, fresh off the bat, FOB, we view racism differently from African Americans. Because I feel like if me as an African, me Natasha, if someone came and told me, oh, you African girl, I would not be offended. Trust me, I would. In fact, I'll be so happy you call me African girl because that's where I'm from. And I've encountered this so many times. I have a friend, she's African American, but if you say anything, if you say like, you African girl, she gets offended. I feel like they get more offended if you call them African, because raised in this society, this American society, where there's racism and all that, they kind of associate being from Africa almost as offensive. You know what I'm saying? From like past experiences and history, and from what I learned even in my sociology class, like an African American will find calling her an African offensive. It's kind of like a very delicate area to go to. But me being African from the continent, it's different because if you call me black or African, I wouldn't have a problem with it because actually I'll be so happy. I'll say, oh, I'm Ugandan. Yeah, I'm from Africa. How did you know? I'll be so happy, you know. Because even when I came, I was so shocked. Because if you say African, I'll be so happy. If someone else, like an African girl who was born and raised here, if you say she's African, she'll get so offended. She'll be like, are you from Uganda? She'll be like, no, I'm from the States. Like, no. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like it's different. Because why? We have different experiences growing up. Yeah. Because personally, I feel like if I was raised in the States with all this racism going on, maybe someone called me African, I don't know, who knows, maybe I'll be offended. But being around Africans since I was born, I haven't encountered any racism before since I was born, because from where? It's only Africans in Uganda. I mean, they're white too, but they're tourists, and you know. So I feel like I have no problem with calling me up. Like, I wouldn't find that offensive at all. That's just an example. So I feel like it's different, totally different.
So racism, overt racism is less accepted in American culture, I think, at least from the region that I've been in America, from the Northeast. But then again, you have to ask yourself, the fact that the structures still exist mean that we've moved any far? Has there been progress?
I'm just gonna ask, how much do you know about slavery? Being from the continent, maybe it was taught a different way than how it's taught in the U.S. And I was just, wondering how it was taught, if it was taught with a more Eurocentric approach or with a more Afrocentric approach. Do you think it was more authentic because it was coming from the continent? What do you think, and how?
What I think is it was more authentic coming from the continent. Because, for example, when I learned East African history, I learned about slavery in Uganda, that occurred in Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania and, the neighboring countries. We actually went to the places where the slaves used to be, like the places where they take the slaves and chain them up. I mean, I feel like it's more authentic because we learned a lot about the rest of it.
So, do you know what African diaspora means?
I guess I think it's people whose ancestors are from Africa. So, people who are in the world who have roots and origin in Africa.